Well, welcome everybody. As a quick introduction, my name is Carly Cox. I am a second year MBA at Wharton and the Vice Chair of Competitions for this year's conference, and I will be your MC for today's competitions. And just wanted to thank everyone for joining. I know I've spoken to a lot of you in email throughout the competition process, so we're so excited that today is finally the day. I first want to congratulate our finalists for making it thus far in the competition. We actually received over 30 project submissions from student teams really around the globe, and we're incredibly impressed with your insights and recommendations. And I also want to welcome our judges, who I will introduce shortly, as well as any representatives that we might have from Teach for America on the line. We were so thrilled to partner with TFA for this year's competition, and you really have been an incredible partner throughout this whole process. Okay, so just to go through the agenda, first we'll do some introductions of our judges, followed by the team presentations with some Q&A from the judges, and then the judges will deliberate and all other attendees can depart. So to welcome our esteemed panel of judges, I first want to welcome Mike Metzger from Teach for America. Mike is the Vice President of External Affairs Strategy for Teach for America, and he's been with TFA for 8 years. He's an MIT engineer and former calculus teacher who has a passion for eliminating the achievement gap and increasing opportunities for all students. So Mike, do you want to give a wave out there? Great. Thanks for joining, Mike. Next, I want to welcome Julie Wargo. Julie is the National Managing Director, Regional Support and Assignment for TFA. Before joining the TFA admissions team, Julie taught high school social studies. She now leads the regional assessment and offer work and designs systems to ensure that TFA matriculates exceptional leaders to the corps. Welcome, Julie. All right, next I want to welcome Dr. Ethan Burris, who is a professor and department chair of management at the Chevron Centennial Fellow at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. He is also a director of the Center for Leadership and Ethics. He earned his PhD in management from Cornell University and has served as the visiting scholar at Microsoft and Google. Welcome, Ethan.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Next, we welcome Monica Enescu, who is a senior data scientist for the MBA program at the Wharton School. She is also a lecturer in the statistics department and alumna of Penn Engineering Data Science graduate program. Welcome, Monica.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Nanda Kumar, who is a senior qualitative analyst for the Seattle Kraken hockey operations R&D team. She previously spent 2 seasons as a quantitative analyst for the Philadelphia Eagles and graduated from Wharton with a BS in economics and concentration in statistics. Welcome, Namita.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you again all for being here. Okay, well, really getting into it, let's get into the presentations. Here on the screen, you will see the order in which the teams will present. Each team will have 8 minutes max to present their analysis and insights. And teams will be alerted in the chat by me when they have 1 minute left and when time is up, and I'll say last sentence for that. Judges will then have 5 minutes of Q&A to ask members questions. And I know that we might not have time for each judge to ask a question for each team. So I will also write times up when it's time to move on to the next presentation. Okay, with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. Again, we just want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here. We are the PAC Zoom Busters. I am Maddie Bannon, and my fellow teammates are Chris Quelio and Sonia Kapoor. We are a group of second-year MBAs from the Wharton School, and we're very excited to share with you our findings and recommendations. So with the dual mandate in mind of increasing core member completion and satisfaction, we conducted an initial diagnostic to try and understand the current state of these variables. A few things we learned that we wanted to share with you include that 53% of TFA core offerees complete the second year of the program. With respect to satisfaction, we learned that the average score for satisfaction in year 1 is 5.5. In year 2, that increases to 5.7. When we take a deeper dive on satisfaction and look at it from a cohort and regional level, we uncovered a number of interesting insights, which we've highlighted here for you on the right-hand side of the slide, and we'll elaborate on a little bit further on in the presentation. So with our diagnostic completed, we used regression analysis to try and understand if there were significant relationships between our observed variables and our selected outcome variables. Our model selection process resulted in very limited predictive power, as you can see from our scores for residual deviance and adjusted R-square. But it did suggest that there are some directional relationships based off of the identification of some significant predictors for each of our outcome variables. So a few things that we wanted to highlight here are that we learned that there were limited to no significant predictors related to region code, school type, district type, and match preferences for all of our outcome variables. And specifically when we highlight our completion outcome variables, so quit and completion of year 2, we actually didn't find any significant predictors as it relates to matching outcomes, matching preference for region or subject. Lastly, we wanted to highlight the validation of a very intuitive relationship that we found, which is, as you can see, if we focus on our outcome variable of completing year 2, satisfaction scores in year 1 are a significant predictor. And so this suggests obviously that higher year 1 satisfaction positively impacts the likelihood of completing year 2.
So we also realized that by assuming that all core members become at risk of quitting the day they get their offer, we could visualize attrition by modeling the probability of a core member staying through each phase of TFA using survival curves. So this slide shows 3 of the visualizations that this assumption allowed us to make and how useful the patterns were. For example, on the far left, you see that matching region preferences 1 versus 3 had a pretty significant effect on survival probability, whereas on the far right, home region actually didn't vary all that much. And after identifying these patterns across 10 variables, we used the same data and assumptions to use another survival analysis technique, which was just to model the likelihood of quitting while controlling for match preferences and applicant variables. And through this, we found that at any point in time, probability of quitting was higher if a candidate had done FASTAP or for each level less preferred subject or region they were matched to. And inversely, the higher their mission knowledge alignment rating or being in applicant pool B, the lower their likelihood of quitting at any stage. So at this point, we had directional insight, but we still had the question of how to apply our collective findings to the core members. And so our approach was to use the data to segment the core members. And to summarize an iterative process, we took the 17 applicant variables TFA had access to before they matched someone and reduced them to 8 dimensions or summary variables. And then using those summary variables, we found 3 clusters created the most distinct groups. The chart on the right shows how effective this segmentation approach was, with green and blue both high on the x-axis, which is PC1 or summary variable 1, but split by y, PC2. And then the red cluster is just defined by being low on x, primarily defined by being low on x. And to help with interpretation, we created this next slide. So if you think of each cluster as an archetype, that red cluster overall had less relative low income experience, lower mission alignment scores, and lower candidate strength. So to remember that, we simplify and we just call them the inexperienced core member cluster. And then we did the same interpretation for the next 2. So green and blue were relatively higher on experience, mission alignment, and strength. But what separates green from blue is that they were less likely to do the FASTAP and more likely to be applicant pool A. And since we don't know what applicant pool A means, to remember this group, we called them the thoughtful core members for the additional thought that went into their applications. And then finally for blue, they did faster apps, so we called them efficient. And this was powerful because up until now, our models were providing us with directional insight, but not a lot of predictive power. And using this approach, we were able to simplify the problem. And instead of looking at all applicants, we had a framework to target interventions based on the data. So with that in mind, I'll pass to Sonia to talk you through how we wanted to apply the recommendations.
Thanks, Chris. So one of the key applications of this archetyping was actually assignment preference matching. So for the 3 archetypes that we just spoke through, we know their satisfaction and we know their tenure. Clusters can have high satisfaction and low tenure, or the opposite. So the decision in front of us was, do we focus on tenure or satisfaction as a leading indicator while deciding how to honor preferences. To choose between the two, we actually drew on our learnings from the survival and the regression analysis we spoke about earlier. So survival analysis told us that matching a candidate's region as well as subject preferences is a statistically significant indicator of attrition. However, regression analysis told us that matching region preferences is actually not a significant indicator of satisfaction. Matching subjects is significant, but it only comes up in year 2. Because preference matching seems to impact tenure more based on our statistical analysis than satisfaction, we choose that as the leading indicator. And since cluster 1 and cluster 3 have the least tenure, we recommend that they be prioritized for preference matching. On one hand, the inexperienced core members are the novices. They are less comfortable with TFA's environment, and we need to do whatever we can to make them comfortable. On the other, cluster 3 are the ones who are the all-stars. They're the natural TFA fits. And we also need to appease and satisfy and do everything we can to retain them. So in summary, prioritize 1 and 3, inexperienced as well as efficient core members for honoring assignment preferences. Moving on to the second recommendation, we think that apart from this, TFA can also employ strategic interventions that are tailored at each cluster. And taking cluster 1 as an example, which are the folks with low alignment, low income experience, we can actually do things like creating pods where we expose them to those folks with higher mission alignment. Or we can also think about sponsoring additional pre-matriculation engagement opportunities that get them ready to be in similar environments before they start the program. Finally, throughout our analysis, we actually noticed a lot of interesting insights in terms of data that we think could serve as effective nudges throughout a core member's journey. For example, to influence members to consider less popular regions when they're making their choices, they can, this metric of how average member satisfaction in least preferred regions is 10% more than aggregate satisfaction could be a very powerful nudge. And we have a bunch of more examples on the slide as powerful metrics that we identified. And with that, I would like to thank you for this opportunity for us to present today and to share our insights with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Team Pack Zoom Busters and amazing Zoom backgrounds. All right, with that, let's hear some Q&A from the judges. So judges, please feel free to unmute yourself if someone wants to kick us off for 5 minutes of Q&A.
I'm happy to kick off. I was talking to Julie about this yesterday, and thank you for the presentation. Super cool. The clustering is really interesting. And one of the things that we're thinking about is a lot about not only clustering how you cluster like applicant types, but like clustering at school levels. You didn't talk about that in your presentation. And one is, did the idea of clustering in schools have any impact on your analysis? And if so, how would you think about it in sort of the 3 types of your ABC? I forget the names, are red, blue, yeah, green. Any thoughts there for us?
Yeah, I'll jump in first, but Maddie, feel free to jump in as well. So to directly answer the question, when we decided which variables to put into the clustering, we left out sort of the variables which were related to match outcomes. We wanted to see what was how the clusters came out using only the data TFA had before they decided to make a match and what those preferences were. And so that's not tied into sort of the summary variables or the clusters themselves. Something that you could do to answer that question, though, would be to then sort of take the clusters and correlate them with the different outcomes in terms of which school matches they had, and similar to how we sort of correlated it with tenure as part of our analysis. So that's how I would look at it. I don't think that was part of our original submission, so I don't think we could speak to that right now.
Yeah, and I think I'll add from the regression analysis standpoint, we actually didn't find the school type to be significant.
Thanks.
I think one final note there is when we were looking at the different school types, and I think that's on slide 20, we just in the very, very exploratory phase, Chris, if you want to quickly show that slide.
Yes, slide 20.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So on the right-hand side, we were looking at the different school types, and in the exploratory phase, we saw that just in terms of the sample size and the N for the different school types, it seems that, it's mostly charter schools and traditional public schools, and the percentage completion in both those types, which is the majority of what the data set had, is fairly similar. And reinforced by what Maddie said, that because it didn't come as a significant variable, we didn't delve into it deeper.
Hi all. Thanks very much for the presentation. So I was kind of curious how you're making sense of the low R squareds. So you kind of ran through all that, and then I'm assuming it was a little deflating when you got to the end and saw some pretty small numbers there. And then you kind of went on and did the clustering analysis and said, all right, well, anyway, we're going to divide these up into like different types of teachers and then make some recommendations from there. So how confident are you in these recommendations that they will actually move the needle on things like satisfaction and retention?
Yeah, it's definitely tough to say, and it was disappointing to see the results of our R squared, as you can imagine. I think we weren't totally surprised though, given that people and their decision-making processes are inherently just very difficult to understand and are complex. I think we were we're confident in terms of the significance of the predictors that we found and kind of that directional relationship. We think it is like a helpful framework, but there's caution to also be had. Chris, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
No, I think you summarized our thoughts on it pretty well. I think we were hesitant to say there's a lot of predictive power here, but in terms of just understanding the direction of which factors might have an impact, we were pretty confident. I think it's also worth saying, I guess, one of the things we talked a lot about as a group is that we view data science as like very iterative. So ideally, with these recommendations, we would then be able to sort of try out some interventions and maybe get more specific data or controlled data to see how that looks, and then refine sort of these overall analyses, but obviously not within the scope of this competition.
Okay, great. Any last questions from the judges?
I guess just real quick, first of all, thank you guys for that great presentation. But I was just curious, you kind of mentioned in passing that there were some differences in terms of the regression analysis versus the survival analysis in terms of what variables came up as significant. I'm not sure what the effect sizes relatively were, but can you speak to kind of how you interpreted that and why you think that is?
I think our interpretation basically was to say, by looking sort of at both sets of models, like what was it that was emerging as a pattern between the two, and sort of where do we agree that there's like variables that are converging as interesting ones to look at. Again, nothing really jumped out at us. As the models themselves were not very predictive, but looking for those directional relationships, we found those patterns. The differences in terms of the variables, I think some of that comes down to the survival analysis was using like a hazard function, and also like what the dependent variables were slightly different. So I think when Maddie spoke through regressions, she was looking at some of the like specific dependent variables that were already in the data set, whereas survival analysis was sort of using this assumption about tenure as part of what it was modeling. Maddie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think that covers it. And I know we're tight on time.
Okay, well, thank you, Team Pack Zoom Busters.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Nishchit Sriram.
And I'm Sakshat Rao.
And this is Lav Nambia.
And we are representing NITK Surathkal from India as undergraduate students. And today we're very excited to be here and share our recommendations on how Teach for America can optimize their offer assignment process to enable maximum number of people contributing towards TFA's goal of educational equity.
To start off, we'll give you a brief overview of the problem presented. We then move on to deconstructing the onboarding process and providing insights along the way. Finally, we shall consolidate all our recommendations and introduce the multivariate optimized offer distribution system. Almost 10,000 candidates gets offers from TFA, but only 53% of the core members fulfill their commitment. We noticed that ensuring a positive experience throughout the program is as important as giving them an irrefutable offer, so that more people contribute towards TFA's goal. We now try to explore how positive experiences of candidates can be improved. To begin with, we define metrics to consider the parameters used while assigning offers. Our displeasure metric accommodates both the offered region and offered subject's preference. If a candidate is offered regions and subjects with low preference rankings, displeasure should be low, which is desirable. By analyzing correlations, we deduce these two functions as the most significant predictors for offer acceptance. It is very interesting to notice that displeasure resulting from region preference mismatch maximizes and flattens of the top 5 preferences. This implies that in cases where it is impossible to assign the candidate's top 5 preferences, candidates can be nudged by offering their first preference subject in any possible region. During our analysis, we were able to identify the relative importance of features using linear models. It is noticed that the features depending on the offer, like displeasure, were highly significant when considering offer acceptance. But as seen from the graph, its relative importance slowly decreased over time. This suggests that how we assign offers to applicants might only affect the decision to accept it. But in order to be satisfied in the long run, other aspects of the job like finances, climate, etc. needs to be emphasized while they make their preferences. To do so, we now dive deeper into the onboarding process for the candidates.
The current process by TFA includes the evaluation process, followed by the shortlisted candidates entering their preference list, using which TFA finally assigns offers to the potential core members. However, it presents a question as to how TFA can improve their matching process by understanding willingness of the candidates using the insights gathered from the evaluation process.
We firstly define two metrics called willingness and unwillingness. Willingness represents the scenario where the applicants are still willing to work with TFA, even if their top preferences are not offered. The unwillingness metric represents the scenario where even after being offered a high preference region and subject, the applicant still rejects the offer. After performing correlation analysis, we consider the university selectivity, alignment, and especially low-income community experience features to be a very good separator between willing and unwilling candidates. We also suggest TFA to organize summer mentorship programs for high school and undergraduate students to mentor students from low-income communities. This aims to identify and nurture young talent who can be potential applicants in the future with high willingness. In addition to the willingness, we now look at how insights gathered from region analysis can be used to improve the current process. To better understand the offer assignment process, we compute normalized scores representing how regions are preferred by applicants and offered by TFA, and analyze the difference. The regions which pose a problem are the ones with negative values, that is the red bars. These regions are the ones where TFA requires a lot of teachers, but not many applicants prefer them. Therefore, such regions need to be identified and prioritized by TFA beforehand, so that TFA can nudge people towards such regions. Finally, we also find region familiarity to be a relevant factor for the applicant. If applicants can work near their current location, home, or university, the mere exposure effect prompts them to not only accept the offer, but also have a pleasant experience throughout. We tested our hypothesis using t-testing, which confirmed the validity of our intuition. This motivated us to use region familiarity also in our solution.
Using the insights gathered so far, we now try to explore how we can use these to improve the recommendations provided to the candidates. We suggest the use of a recommendation algorithm to nudge core members towards certain preferences. Which regions to recommend are decided by the high priority regions, which TFA can determine beforehand. We recommend these regions to two types of applicants. First, who are familiar with the region as mentioned in the previous slide, and second, those applicants with high values of willingness parameter who are the most likely to honor their commitment even if the offered regions are lower on their preference list. Now, since we know that what recommendations can improve the offer acceptance, our aim now is to find out how to persuade the applicants to consider these recommendations. On this slide, we demonstrate our proposed dashboard as seen by potential core members who are about to enter their preferences. We utilize well-established nudge theory concepts to assist numbers in making better choices. The users with high willingness are encouraged to look at the offer through the lens of a fresh start, to take bold decisions and pursue new enriching experiences beyond their comfort zone and explore the suggested recommendations. We present a recommended list as default options to add to their preference list, which is created based on the on-ground requirements for teachers. We also bring in the priming effect through a new virtual tour feature where users are shown the student experiences from the local communities to shed light on student aspirations, ground realities, and existing support network in order to visualize the immensity of impact and their necessity at the given locality. We also suggest introducing an Alumni Connect feature, which provides an informational influence by utilizing social proof heuristics.
After persuading applicants to take up certain choices, we now try to optimize the offer assignment process from the perspective of both TFA and the applicants. While assigning offers, we mainly look at two criteria. Firstly, that applicants get as high preferences as possible, which would minimize their displeasure. And secondly, we ensure that the present distribution was not drastically changed while making new offers, since it could reflect TFA's on-the-ground requirements. We propose a neural network trained using reinforcement learning as an end-to-end solution for this task. While making new offers, we reward a network when it tries matching the expected offer distribution and penalize it when it increases applicant displeasure. After training over multiple iterations, it starts learning to take those actions which would result in the most optimum offer to each individual candidate. As a result of our RL model, we obtain an optimal balance with a significant decrease in the displeasure for an almost similar offer distribution.
Consolidating all our insights so far, we now present the recommended plan of action to assign the best offers to potential core members. After the evaluation process as conducted by TFA, the list of potential core members to whom offers have to be made is obtained. Now TFA can use the recommendation algorithm to nudge candidates to make better choices that result in acceptance and positive experience through matriculation. After collecting the preference list, the multivariate optimized offer distribution system can be used to assign the most appropriate offer, suiting both TFA and the candidate's requirements. We hope that these recommendations will serve as valuable additions to help TFA make their onboarding process more holistic, optimized, and consistent, ultimately leading to more equitable education, academic, and personal growth of millions of students across America. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We can now hear from some Q&A from the judges.
Hey guys, that was really interesting. I think you went about this in a lot of creative ways. I'm just really curious as to the reinforcement learning model at the end. Can you speak more to that, kind of what goes into it, how it's structured, and what are kind of the, I guess, effect sizes are tough, I guess, with the machine learning framework, but the impact that you feel this will add.
Okay, I'd like to take up that question. So if you can go to the appendix slide 1, love. Yeah, so basically our model is structured in such a way that it takes 3 actions, one of 3 actions. So let's say applicant A has now been offered his 4th preference region. So now the model can basically determine whether that applicant should be offered the 3rd preference region, the 5th preference region, or should the offer be unchanged. So basically this neural network that you're seeing, wherein we input applicant information, the preference list of the applicant, and the expected offer distribution. So let's say the neural network decides that applicant A should be provided the 3rd preference region. So whether that new offer increases the displeasure, based on that, we reward this model. So basically, after training over multiple iterations, the model learns to take those actions which would minimize the displeasure and maximize the similarity between the expected offer distribution.
Awesome, that helps. That's really cool, thanks.
What do you see as some of the risks to using nudge theory here from our standpoint? This is for hypothetical, like we've tried not in this sophisticated type of way with neural networks, but to like try to move people, you know, talking about certain regions to them during their interview, and we found it to backfire, and then they, you know, don't accept their offers. So like, how do you see the cost benefit to nudge theory based on the data you were looking at?
I would like to take up that question. So we understand that it could add a discomfort while talking to TFA interviewers. So what we thought would be a very valuable addition is adding an alumni connect, where we try to connect potential core members to teachers who have had experience from those regions, and talk about very different types of experience that they've had, including the students, the community, and everything apart from the offer, to gain more insights about what actually happens on ground. And based on that, we give them the ability to make better and more informed choices.
Thanks.
I guess I'll pick up on the question that Namita asked. Do you have a sense for how the offers would change compared to the default before? Like, did you do some sort of training and then look to see the sort of the correlation or the similarity across the different distributions? Like, what would change and how much of an impact would that have ultimately on either the offers made or the retention over these 2 years?
All right, so I think Sakshit, I would refer Sakshit to this question. Sakshit, you're on mute. All right, no issues. So one thing we did test is how the we use the two different types of actions while we're training the model. So that one was maintaining the ground reality situations by the similarity of the distribution that TFA currently maintains. So that was one factor. And the other scenario was where all the applicants were given their preferences, and that resulted in a lower similarity to the distribution that TFA currently has. Now, as a result of our model, we achieved a very significant decrease in displeasure values. So that decreased from 0.291 to 0.148. And we see that similarity is much better as compared to when applicants are given their first preferences always. But obviously there is a very small decrease of 0.33 when we try to consider 0.23 when we consider the existing offer distribution as given by TFA.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, team Nick K. We're gonna have to end it there. And next will be team Mediterranean Diet. All right, go ahead.
Hi, we are the small yet mighty team Mediterranean Diet. My teammate Alicia and I are thrilled to walk you through our rigorous insights and novel propositions for TFA to adopt for an improved candidate experience. First, we will walk you through our methodology, which will frame up our insights, and in the second half, we'll propose new initiatives for TFA and its candidates. Everything begins and ends with the life cycle of a candidate. This is TFA's ride or die. So we started kicking the tires by just looking at what a candidate journey looks like. If we were to create an example candidate, Jane, who's newly accepted into the program, has 3 milestones in our journey that are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, as you can see as A, B, and C. Jane has about 80% chance of taking the offer. Without more data on who else applied alongside her and the details of the admissions process, we recommend TFA to anticipate that success rate as BAU. Year 0 is a risky time for Jane, when most of her colleagues drop out. The summer institute or the matching process may not meet expectations and candidates give up before their term begins. Finally, we're excited to see only 1.6% of the candidates with the offer drop during their teaching tenure. We want to understand what makes Jane sticky. We also mapped out a candidate's behavioral process, breaking down a journey into even smaller chunks to identify pain points or bottlenecks as we interviewed numerous TFA alumni. Our candidate behavior research enabled us to derive hypotheses that address these bottlenecks for each step of the way, as you can see on the map. As we dig deeper into our insights, you will notice that they're all tied to the specific parts of the journey for Jane. Now, as our first insight, we saw candidates with more options and less mission alignment turn down the offers the most. Now, we're not saying turn down candidates who come from selective schools that set them up for more opportunities, but TFA can focus on mission alignment training as it was positively correlated and taken an offer. FastApp is also lowering the barrier of entry for less dedicated candidates. Secondly, we're excited to see the most candidates go into their top choice or subject or region. The current matching works well. 98% of the candidates have either their first region or first subject, but we still lose a quarter of the candidates who got their offers after they accept or before they start the matching with their match school. Now, this has 2 implications. Either the preferences are not collected properly or they have no impact on churn. Thirdly, the TFA's website mentions that they know the location is the most important thing, but is that evident in the data? Here we see candidates who get into their second choice in the subject are dropping out faster, minus 1.15%, than candidates who get into their second choice of region, minus 0.61%. So we're comparing deltas of deltas. So there is a misalignment in the importance of each preference. Now, in our fourth insight, we shift from preferences to performance. Surely there must be indicators for sticky candidates. While Pool B candidates completed the program at a higher rate, Pool A candidates had strong success indicators such as the education major. Pool A candidates can achieve the TFA's mission through other ways, such as staying in their home region, which was also positively correlated. In the fifth, we were surprised to see that it is not possible to catch high-risk candidates through the current satisfaction survey, as there's no correlation between low satisfaction and dropping out. TFA should establish a new mechanism to measure satisfaction and track participants' experience to predict churn. Finally, we know candidates who drop out least while teaching, but not every dropout is equal. Churn during teaching is extremely disruptive to a school and its students. The interviews we conducted highlight how there is more to it than just matching candidates with regions. And that is why we must come up with initiatives that would predict and prevent churn after the matching period, while reinventing the matching process, not only from an algorithm standpoint, but also from preferences, collection, and ranking. So now Alicia is going to talk about our initiatives.
Thank you, Zarve. Based on our assessment and insights, we designed the following 3 initiatives for TFA to consider: optimize matching, predict churn, and prevent churn. Let's deep dive in the individual initiatives. Our first recommendation is for TFA to redesign the current preference collection form. The idea is to launch a platform where you can see an illustrative mock-up here, where Jane would be able to have a more comprehensive collection of her preferences. We would recommend to use a conjoint analysis methodology to capture her individual detailed preferences with utility metrics. In particular, the advantage for Jane would be that she would be able to communicate to TFA her preferences beyond location, subject, and grade. She would be able to add new features, for example, the location type, the type of school. And this would also allow TFA to interact with Jane, not only with a user-friendly interface, but also including nudges to motivate her to choose, for example, low-demand options or other options that would provide high impact for the community or the program overall. We believe that this could be a very simple test. This could be run out as a very simple test, as an interface that TFA could test with a smaller group of candidates at first. The second initiative is to enroll Jane and other course members in a curated text-based check-in program. So we know by the extensive amount of interviews that we ran with course members that the program is extremely intense and can be psychologically hard. So the idea is to keep the community, to keep the course members feel part of the community with recurring check-ins, support messages, and general community updates. This is our recommendation here is to use a candid and informal tone, very human, to reinforce the sense of belonging and collect recurring pulse checks to track their member experience. We believe that such approach could substitute the surveys, the satisfaction surveys that are currently being used, and possibly could become the place where to gather the data to predict churn. Our last initiative is a bit more of a heavy lift, but we have heard from corps members how important it is to really understand the classroom experience of the school. So our idea is our last initiative is a double-sided program where at first the new corps members will be assigned to a second year in the school where they will be teaching, doing a couple of weeks of shadowing with the second year. And once having observed the real experience in the classroom and the school where they will be assigned, the idea is that afterwards, when they will be in Summer Institute, they will be able to choose from a need-based curriculum based on what they notice that they lack in terms of skills and what is important for the class specifically. Finally, we have estimated that the 3 initiatives could add up to $1 million value for TFA, not only for the higher satisfaction of the corps members and the higher engagement, but also for the reduced retention, the increased retention that we expect. Thank you very much. We're very excited to to be helping in this challenging project, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thanks for your presentation. Super cool. I love using conjoints. Use them a lot in like our surveys for like other sorts of random things. I'm trying to think about how currently like applicants tell us the preferencing process is too complex. If you had a conjoint, you know, with 50 regions, 13 subjects, 6 school types, and some other variable, doesn't that just increase the complexity and require them to do like more actions? How would you think about the practicality? How would you recommend we would do that?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think that here the importance would be to really allow candidates that are more flexible. For you to realize which candidates are more flexible, which candidates have, you know, are more open to, for example, having a good experience, even though they aren't allocated in the right region. Having said that, practically, the idea is really to try to understand which feature is really important to the candidate. So not necessarily digging deeper into all the possibilities in terms of location. Possibly, I think that from our understanding, the current form that you have in terms of grouping the regions is very accurate, is very valid. But then how like enabling your corp members to let you know whether, for example, the only thing they care about is being in a charter school, that is the reason why we're suggesting a conjoint.
That's very cool. I'm always trying to get like Bitmojis at work. I have a question about like the 2-week experience. If you scroll to that page, like how do you decide to put it there, like before summer training? It sounds like post-admit. We've actually played around with a summer-long internship in some of our less preferred regions, and we still can't get people to go there. So I'm curious, like, did you think about putting it other places? Why'd you put it here, and why'd you decide on those objectives for it?
Yeah, so these 2 initiatives honestly come mostly from qualitative data and comments that course members shared. We understand that there's already a lot of exchange between alumni, second years, and the new corp members. So for example, some former corps members do come to Summer Institute, if I understand correctly, to share their experience. Here, the idea would be to really allow, once the match is done, so the person is confirmed in a certain school, then having them, you know, start to spend a couple of weeks there to get to know the principal, to get to know the other colleagues, and to really spend some time in a classroom, which obviously won't be the same classroom they'll be teaching in. But in our understanding, sometimes corps members in Summer Institute are practice in front of very different scenarios with respect to the ones that they will be assigned to. Does this make sense?
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
How'd y'all come up with the ROI numbers, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. Shall I take this one, or then please jump in?
Yeah. No, take it.
The main idea is that if a corps member leaves, we consider that kind of like the cost. So estimating, basically, we used the person's compensation as value, which probably isn't very accurate, like probably is higher. So we thought that this would be conservative. And then we bottom up tried to estimate the costs. That would be the benefit. The corps member not leaving, that would be the benefit. And we tried bottom up to build the cost that, you know, building the platform, building the text-based program would require.
All right, well, thank you so much, Team Mediterranean Diet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Team Voluntary Apple Turnovers, and Melissa, you can go ahead and present.
Good morning, everyone. We're the Voluntary Apple Turnovers, and today we're going to present our solution to the Teach for America case. My name is Beatrice, and I'm here with my teammates Christopher and Melissa, and we're second-year MBA students at McGill. So before we jump into the project itself, I wanted to recap the problem and our project goals. So as we know, Teach for America wants to be able to matriculate as many candidates as possible, but more importantly, they want the candidates to complete the two-year program and they wanted to have a positive experience. So with that in mind, the objective of our project is to uncover the features that influence completion and satisfaction in year 2, and based on that, we want to provide recommendations. So to address this problem, we decided to create 2 predictive models, one classifier to predict year 2 outcome and one regressor to predict satisfaction before the program begins. So now let's talk about our methodology. So after the data cleaning and preparation, the first step of our analysis was to select the predictors for each of our models. So the first thing we did here was to build a correlation matrix, which allowed us to identify and remove unimportant predictors and flag linear variables. So after narrowing down our potential predictors, we fed them into a gradient boosting model, which allowed us to generate a feature importance plot, as we can see here, and identify the most important variables. So finally, based on this, we performed recursive feature elimination, which allowed us to determine the optimal number of predictors. Now, the next step was to tune our model parameters. So for this, we used grid search with k-fold cross-validation. So for our first model, year 2 outcome, which was a classifier, we tried to optimize the AUC. For a second model, or regressor, we tried to optimize the mean square error. So both metrics are optimized on the testing data set. We didn't seek to optimize our square, given that it's a metric that's based on a training data set, and we believe it's not a good indication of the predictability of the model. So for our final models, again, we used gradient boosting trees, and as we can see here, we found an AUC of 0.6 for the first model and an MSE of 1.2 for the second one. Now, moving forward, here we have representations of the 2 models. So the image in the left represents the model for predicting year 2 outcome, and the image in the right represents the model for predicting satisfaction. So how do we interpret these plots? Let's take the first model as an example. So the first thing to notice here is that on the y-axis, we have our model's predictors ranked, with the most important features appearing at the top. On the x-axis, we have the impact on the model's output. Now, each of these dots represent one observation in the dataset. And the color of the dots tell us whether that variable has a high or a low value for that observation. So let's take the variable FastApp as an example. Here you can see that a high value of FastApp, or the blue dots, have a negative impact in year 2 outcome, meaning that if an application was completed in one seating, it is less likely that the corp would complete year 2. So these plots helped us interpret our model's outcomes and come up with insights, as we will see next. Now Chris is going to present our results and findings.
I just speak about the top 5 variables for each model and the influence that they have on outcomes. So if we look at fast applications, if someone completed the application in one sitting, they're less likely to complete the 2 years. So if someone does it over more than one sitting, they're 23% more likely to complete the 2 years. For region, people who are matched to their first preference are 23% more likely to complete the program as well. Whereas if they're matched to level 2 or 3, it would actually be a decrease. So for essay dimension 9, we actually found that people who scored low on this were more likely to complete the program. So people scoring below 0.0028 in this dimension were 13% more likely to complete. For subject preference, it's similar to region in that those who get their first choice are more likely to complete the program, whereas second or third choice would be a decrease in likelihood. For mission knowledge and alignment, those who were very aligned with it and they had a higher completion rate, the key stat being those who got greater than 3 for mission alignment would be more likely by about 13% to complete the program. This is due to rounding, that there's a lot of coincidence in the numbers, but those were the findings. For the next model, based on satisfaction, there are a few factors here that are out of the control of TFA. We are aware of this, so bicycle score and sun percent. So here satisfaction tends to go up to a certain point, up to 57 on bike score, at which point it tends to decrease. So there's a sweet spot between 32 and 51, which adds about a 0.37 increase in satisfaction. For sun percent, as we would expect, people who are placed in sunny places are more satisfied. The high 70s result in a 0.8 more satisfied candidate, whereas the greater than 79.6 is about a 0.4 increase. So for certification costs, people who are paying less, as we would expect, are more satisfied. The key stat that we found was 6,158. Those who are paying less than that are 0.31 more satisfied out of 7. For essay dimensions, So like this one, 9 was similar to what we saw before. Those who are fitting well to it, less satisfied. Essay dimension 10. Those who are fitting well to this one are actually more satisfied. And finally, year 1 minimum salary, those who get paid more are more satisfied. So the sweet spot was between 40,000 and 44,000. Those candidates were 0.39 more satisfied out of 7. So now Melissa's going to talk about our recommendations based on this.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. So moving on to our recommendations, and these really span the entire member experience from application to regional dynamics. So looking at our models on the application side, we recommend revisiting candidate strength, as we saw that it had an opposite outcome with opposite effect with year 2 outcomes, and to prioritize those candidates with strong adherence to program values. We also recommend reviewing alignment to essay dimensions and also encouraging lengthier application processes. So encouraging candidates to apply over a number of sessions and be more thoughtful with their applications. On the matching side, we recommend prioritizing those top applicants for their first region or subject preference, but we'll talk in the next slide if that's not possible. And on the regional side, as Chris mentioned, these are largely out of the control of Teach for America, but we do have some recommendations here. The first being to provide region-specific trainings or workshops to help acclimatize candidates to their new their region or area. And on the salary and certification cost side, again, it is a bit outside of the control, but if we are able to subsidize some of these costs through cost savings from lower attrition due to implement these recommendations, or through increased scholarships or bursaries, it could help improve satisfaction in this area. So if we were to implement these recommendations, we project an upper bound impact of a 47% increase in year 2 completion for candidates. So moving on to the next slide and talking about regional dynamics a bit more, we've designed an intervention that could potentially measure how increased support can improve satisfaction for those candidates who don't get their first region of preference. So by taking the group of applicants not getting their first choice and applicants coming from different regions, we would split these applicants into 2 groups, one getting tailored region-specific training and access to a coaching session, while the other being the control group. And through that, measure year 1 midway and full year satisfaction to see if increased support and coaching actually improves satisfaction and accomplishment through to the end of the program. So with that, we hope our data-driven recommendations can help Teach for America in recruiting and keeping great teachers in their schools. We thank you for your time and we open it up for feedback and for questions.
Great. Well, thank you for the great presentation. That was really interesting. I guess I'm seeing this fast application now in a couple of different presentations, so it seems to be an important data point. And I saw one of your recommendations was to increase the application time. So I guess my question would be, first of all, can you speak to what that data point represents exactly in the data set? And also then, how do we know that this isn't just the fast application time isn't just correlated with something else that could potentially be the actual cause of retention versus, so how would actually increasing the application time would actually increase retention? Like, is there a sort of meaningful explanation of that?
Yeah, so I can start that off, and the team can come in if needed. So in terms of the data point itself, so I think if we went back to Bia's original slide, she was discussing how basically it was a 0-1 data point. So if applicants completed in one session versus if they completed in a number of sessions, and so we saw that there was a great polarization between the two in terms of year 2 outcomes. So we did recommend here to encourage more thoughtful applications, because that was what we were seeing there. But as future recommendation to Teach for America as well, one of the other things we could recommend is to test this out and to see if we do provide nudges to candidates to take more time with their application, or to spread their application on a variety of outcomes on a variety of sessions. Does that actually improve outcome? And if not, then to look further into it and see if there's maybe another root cause here.
Just to add to that, another thing that we discussed, another possibility there, is that maybe candidates that take longer in their application are more serious. So if someone completes an application like very fast and just in one sitting, maybe they're not like your ideal candidate. So another alternative would also be to measure the time that candidates take on their application. And this could be an additional criteria for selecting candidates.
Great, thank you.
You mentioned like an ROI curve, I think of like 47% or something at some point. Could you just very quickly tell me how you guys modeled that?
Yes, I think that's on slide, I can't remember. The AUC curve, right? You're interested in understanding how we found that?
Yeah, you said they would increase completion rates by an upper bound of some 40-something percent.
Oh, right. Okay, the completion bound. Right. So basically what we did, first we used our model to make predictions for the entire data set. And we found, let's say, a predicted completion rate for year 2. Again, based on our model, not the actual outcomes. Then what we did, if we go back to the slide with the top 5 variables for the model, which I think is slide 13, we look at what would be the ideal values for each of those variables. And let's say all candidates had these ideal values. So we created a modified data set, made new predictions, found a new completion rate, and then compared to the previous rate. And with that, we found these 47%. So if somehow TFA could influence all these factors or review some of those factors, they could potentially increase retention by 47%.
Thanks.
I think we have time for one more question if any judges have any last ones. Okay, great. Well, thank you, team voluntary apple turnovers. And last but not least, we have team behavior change.
Lovely. Okay, so we all know why we're here, so I will just hop into it. I'm joined today by my team members, Dan and Jen. We are all graduate students here at the University of Pennsylvania studying behavioral and decision science. We all had the lovely privilege of getting our undergraduate degrees at all corners of this continent. I myself went to the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Burris, you'll be happy to know that I very valiantly defended the use of "the" in the university name. Dan from UCLA and Jen from the University of Toronto. I've recently been informed that Canadians pronounce Toronto without the second T. So for all our McGill friends and Jen, I am learning. So I'll quickly guide you through some of our main objectives, as well as the valuable transformations and our methods, and lastly, some of our recommendations. So we had 2 main objectives: to build a model that accurately predicts year 2 completion. And secondly, we're really interested in what-if scenario in terms of region assignment. So if you look at this little graph here, this trophy with the number 1 depicts candidates that got their first choice region, but we wanted to see, would they have confirmed if they did not get their first choice region, and vice versa. For candidates that got anything other than their first choice, would they have been confirmed if they got their first choice region? So how do we do that? We use this thing called k-nearest neighbor matching. And essentially what this is for many of you that are maybe in a much better situation in life than me as a graduate student, you get the woes of real estate. And if you want to know how much your house would sell for, you look at comps, houses that are similar to yours in terms of square footage or amenities, or bedrooms, and you see how much did those sell for, and you get a good baseline. That's essentially what we're doing here with the candidates. So we were also interested in creating some new variables that we didn't necessarily get from the raw data. The first was STEM major. We wanted to see, we actually went through and manually classified all of the majors as STEM or non-STEM, and we did the same thing with the subjects. And we thought this might have a little bit of interplay between the 2 variables that would give us some sense of a candidate that came from a STEM background that was matched with the STEM subject, and so on. We were also really interested in the number of unique regions ranked, and this gives us an idea of how narrow or broad the candidate's preferences were. But in addition to these, we were also really interested in the difference between the average of the top preferences and the match region. So for example, if I had ranked Arizona, Texas, and Florida, you might conclude that I really hate the cold, and you'd be right. But if I was matched with Chicago, that's like a very, very different match than my very hot region preference. And so that's also what we wanted to measure and capture here. So to give you a quick recommendation overview, we want to talk a little bit more about school types. Topics 8 and 10 on the essays, as well as non-STEM candidates, and finally, that narrow and broad scope that I talked about. So jumping into differences in school type, we sought to do the cross-validation thing, find a model that worked really well. And you'll notice that we had a couple models, our gradient boosting and logistic regression, that did really well, accuracy scores of about 90%. And you might be like, yeah, that's kind of suspicious. And we thought so too. So when we dig into it, we find that the lion's share of the feature importances, as well as the variables with the highest coefficients, where this is charter and is public, which came from a transformation of the school type variable. And we create this in this nice little funnel. We see that if you have any type of school data, meaning is public, is private, is charter, you complete year 2 at 91%, versus if you have missing data, it's only 5%. Now, we don't really know what's going on here. We would love to tell you, but we think that this is really fruitful for TFA to kind of dig into and find out what's going on. We suspect that there may be some kind of confounding variable, but we're not exactly sure. So moving on to kind of essays and major. Like I mentioned before, we're really interested in these what if scenarios. So what this slide is depicting is of candidates that did not get their first choice. Our model said that these candidates would have confirmed if they received their first choice region. And so then we looked at to see this graph, how are they different from the average candidate? And these stood out, essay topics 8, 10, and STEM major, meaning that they score lower on essay topics 8 and 10, and they're less likely to be a STEM major. So intuitively, we recommend that you give priority in terms of region to these candidates who score low, as well as non-STEM candidates. So moving on to regional focus. So this is looking at just the complement of the graph that you saw before, rather than looking at candidates that did not get their first choice. These are candidates that did get their first choice and confirmed, but our model says they would have rejected if they received any region other than their first choice. And then we do the same thing. We look at how are they different from the average candidate. And so we see our friends come up again, essay topics 8, 10, and STEM major, all indicating that it's really important for them to get their first choice. But we also see this top regions ranked come in. And again, that is how narrow or broad the candidates' region preferences were. So for candidates that have much more narrow preferences, meaning they ranked fewer regions, it is more important to give them the first choice. So we think TFA could experiment with either giving priority to candidates with narrow region preferences, or we think that we can take advantage of a slew of behavioral science concepts here in which individuals really, really care about being consistent with prior decisions and simply ask them to rank more regions in their top level. And you can think about this as like going to a restaurant that's like really, really hyped up and you're really excited and you order the special and it turns out to be just objectively bad and it's not very good, but then you try to convince yourself that it is good because you've been looking forward to it for so long and you had this decision. And that's essentially what we're advocating for here, that TFA can use that to their advantage here. But in addition to that, what we're also interested in is the idea of community. Is our more popular regions, do candidates more satisfied or they matriculate at higher rates? Because there's maybe a sense of camaraderie. And what we found is that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. On the left here, we have region popularity broken by the quartile, the completion rate broken by how popular the region is in quartiles. And we find that there's very little difference in satisfaction between how popular the region is. And then same thing with satisfaction. We find very little differences in satisfaction based on the popularity of the region. So we don't really have any evidence to suggest that for regions where it's more dense, that satisfaction or matriculation really, really makes a big difference here. So to kind of sum everything up, we think that school type is very, very big for TFA. We think that there's something going on here, maybe a confound, something in the data we're not able to see, but it could lead to something that is really, really impactful. Secondly, we think that it's important to experiment with giving priority on region based on candidate essay topics 8 and 10. Again, we would love to tell you what they are, but maybe Mike and Julia will reveal what those are to us and we'll have a big revelation we'll all celebrate, as well as giving preference to those that come from non-STEM backgrounds. And again, giving an additional preference to candidates that have very narrow region preferences. And we also think TFA can experiment with just requiring candidates to rank more regions in their top level. So I know I just assaulted you with numbers and graphs and words, so please let me know what your questions
are. Thanks for that, especially like the quote. One question that I was just wondering about is one of the things that we have is if we nudge people into like other regions or to your point of like where we might be able to get people to accept, one of the things that we worry, you're like, satisfaction and, completion scores don't matter once they get there, but is that true of just who's going there versus if we tried to push people in there, maybe their experiences would differ. But I think you would say no, based on your nearest neighbor or friend. I forget the exact word used for the clustering. Is that right interpretation, or would you build on that?
Sorry, could you say that again? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So we worry, like, if we get people to go to regions they don't necessarily want to go to, they will have less good experiences, right? And you're saying like the data shows that's not true, but the current data, most people are going to regions that they want to go to. So like, how do we not risk like putting a bunch of people in regions they don't want to go to increase yield, and then them having bad experiences and then feeding back into and lessening our brand value or proposition or word on campus or for future seasons, like a multi-stage option.
So I should clarify. So we're not necessarily seeing that there's differences between regions that they want to or don't want to go to, but just the popularity of the regions themselves. So of regions that have more TFA core members assigned to them, we don't see any difference between those that have a lot of members in them versus those that have very few members in them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Hey, so yeah, great presentation. I just had a question regarding, it seems like those kind of similarity score k-nearest neighbor approach is a real backbone of this. So could you maybe provide some more details about like across what dimensions does that score, look at and how that is used exactly?
Absolutely. So I will go back to this slide. Here. So we trained two separate models, right? First on those candidates that received their first choice and those candidates that did not receive their first choice. And this was the features that went into this was the actual variables on the application, similar to how I believe the first group said, where it was like everything before they actually make the match. So then we take that model of those that received their first choice and then use that to predict on those that did not receive and say, okay, how would they have done in the absence of getting their first choice. And so that's how we created these predictions.
Thanks, Arvind, and team. Just one quick follow-up question. I may have missed this because of all the assault of numbers on us throughout. Can you walk us through a little bit of intuition about the effect sizes? So if TFA made some of these changes, like what would the impact ultimately be on retention at the end?
So with this particular, with the nearest neighbor, what we're actually really confirmed about, what we were actually really concerned about was the confirmation process. So for which candidate is it really more important to give them their top region so they actually confirm their offer? So we believe for this, when we see essay topic 8, 10, and STEM major, we see that for these candidates, it's really important to give them their top region so that they confirm. We were not really, like I kind of mentioned in our model building, we were not really confident in our ability to predict year 2 completion or satisfaction very well because of those variables that kind of threw a wrench in and things, the school type variable.
Okay, we have time for one more question, if there's any remaining.
Can you speak more to the interesting result you found about the school type variable? I just want to make sure I caught that basically if that data was missing, then they were much less likely or more likely to?
If that data was missing, they were much less likely to complete. So we found that for about half the data set, right, they have school type data. And when you look at this funnel right here, you see that 91% of them complete year 2 if that variable is filled in. But for anything, there was also missing data and NA. But for any of these candidates, the likelihood of completing was much lower. The only 5% end up completing year 2. And so when we're building these models, our decision trees and everything, we're constantly splitting on these variables. And when we even kind of like tried to dig in, like what's going on here, we asked questions, but it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of answers on what was happening. So we think there may be something here, maybe there's something, some additional information that we're not able to see within the data itself. But we think it could be very valuable in determining who ultimately completes and does not.
Yeah, so I guess when I see this data, I'm just wondering, how suspicious were you that this was probably just not clean data? And how did you decide whether or not to still incorporate it in your models? And did you keep it in your models after seeing this suspicion?
That's a great question. And to answer it right, we were very suspicious, and that's kind of why we pivoted and went to the confirmation route, in which we didn't use the school type data. We mainly used the application data that came prior to matching. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
to all the teams. On behalf of the whole conference team, just thank you everyone for participating throughout the process. It started all the way back in January with the teams registering, and it's just been a great process alongside with TFA to get to this point. So congratulations to everyone on the finals, and thank you so much. I now will be inviting the judges to a breakout room where they will deliberate. And finalists, you'll be hearing from us in the coming days with the results. But again, just thank you so much for your time and presentations today. So judges, hang tight. I will send you to a breakout room, and everyone else, feel free to drop and have a great day.